Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osaberg501 and today I want to go over all of the skills that we know of for the Sorceress in Diablo 4. And keep in mind, this is just all of the skills we know of. There could potentially be some more on release of the game, and there will most likely be more added in future seasons and future expansions. And we're going to be getting all this information from a Diablo 4 build calculator that someone has created. And this pretty much has the most information you're going to find on skill trees and different skills for all the classes. So I'll have that linked in the description. Well, first off, we have to go over some basic information for the skill trees in Diablo 4, which is where all the different class skills are going to be located. So in Diablo 4, you have the big skill tree, and it's going to be split up into different sections depending on what category that skill's in. And if you want to unlock a skill, you're going to put one of your skill points into that skill, and that will unlock the ability to use that skill. You could put 4 additional points into that to upgrade that skill even more, and then you're able to choose an upgrade for that skill, and then you're also able to choose one of 2 additional upgrades. And we don't have a lot of the specifics for the numbers or tuning of these skills, so I primarily just want to look at an overview of the skill and less on the actual tuning or numbers of them. And I also want to give an example of the upgrades you can expect from these skills. I'm not going to go over all of the different upgrades for every skill because the video will just be ridiculously long. And like all the classes in Diablo 4, your skills are split into 6 different categories. These essentially just give you an idea of how these skills are going to perform, and you can mix and match any amount of skills you want from any of the 5 different categories. The 6th category is ultimates, and you can only use 1 ultimate at a time. But if you want to use 4 basic skills at once, you could do that. So to start off, we have our basic skills, and first we have Frostbolt. Now this has a lucky hit chance of 30, and most if not all of these sorcerer skills are going to have a lucky hit chance. Now lucky hit chance is kind of a different version of crit. From my understanding, it doesn't do anything at a baseline, but there are other effects in the game that you can learn through legendaries, through your skill tree, and through items that can add effects to hitting a lucky hit. So it's a little bit complex, but it's not too important when looking at the basic skills. But for Frostbolt, you throw a bolt of frost at an enemy dealing 35% damage and chilling them. Chilling is just a slow. And also for most of these skills for the Sorceress, you can also put them in your enhancement slots. We've gone over that before, I'd recommend looking that up. But a quick version is you get enhancement slots as your unique effect as a Sorceress. You can put a skill in that enhancement slot and it gives you a really strong passive effect. So the enhancement effect for Frostbolt is a lucky hit. Your direct damage has up to 100% chance to chill for 30%. And again, chilling is slowing. So if you put Frostbolt in your enhancement slot, now you actually have an effect for that lucky hit chance. And for the upgrade example, we have Enhanced Frostbolt. Frostbolt has a 15% chance to explode on chilled targets, hitting surrounding enemies. Chance increased to 100% against frozen targets. So now you have this chance to cause an AoE effect from your Frostbolt. Next up, we have Firebolt with a lucky hit chance of 20%, hurl a flaming bolt dealing 10% damage and burning for 40% over 8 seconds. And the enhancement effect is lucky hit. Your direct damage has up to 100% chance to burn enemies for additional damage over 8 seconds. And then in an example of an upgrade would be Firebolt pierces burning enemies. So if you hit an enemy with Firebolt, catch them on fire, your next Firebolts are going to pierce them to do some cleave or AoE damage. Next up, we have Spark with a lucky hit chance of 10%. Launch a bolt of lightning that shocks enemies 4 times, dealing damage with each hit. And the enhancement effect is killing an enemy has a 10% chance to form a crackling energy. And this isn't super up-to-date information, but from a few years ago, we saw that crackling energy will give you mana if you walk over it. And then an example of an upgrade is Enhanced Spark. Each time Spark hits, it has a 20% chance to hit up to 3 additional enemies, dealing some small amount of damage. If there are no other enemies to hit, Spark instead deals 20% increased damage to its primary target. And I think this is a bit more of a complex or more interesting example of an upgrade to one of these skills, because this has a different effect depending on if there's only one target or if there's additional targets. Then finally, for the basic skills, we have Arc Lash with a lucky hit chance of 30%. You unleash arcing lightning that shocks enemies in front of you for damage. Every 10 times Arc Lash swipes, it stuns all enemies hit for 2 seconds. Then the enhancement effect is whenever you are hit, there's a 20% chance the attacker is stunned for 1 second. And this enhancement effect is incredibly strong. And I know there has been some people kind of theorizing on different builds that specifically uses this enhancement effect. And I think this enhancement effect is probably going to be used by quite a lot of builds. That's just incredibly strong. Then an example of an upgrade would be Enhanced Arc Lash. If Arc Lash's initial swipe critically strikes, it swipes an additional time. So this is actually very strong and opens up to having a full critical chance lightning build because you're pretty much doubling the damage you deal when you're dealing crits, and crits are already dealing more damage than a normal hit. And I'm wondering if this second swipe is going to have its own chance to crit, or if the second swipe is also always going to be a crit because it's procced off of a crit. And also keep in mind, you're not going to be able to just keep proccing a bunch of swipes because it's only off the initial hit. So next up, we have core skills. And first off, we have Frozen Orb with a mana cost of 40 and a lucky hit chance of 20%. Unleash an orb that chills for a percentage and expels piercing shards, dealing damage. Upon expiration, Frozen Orb explodes, dealing more damage and chilling enemies for additional percentage. And again, chilling is slowing. The enhancement effect is whenever you cast a non-basic skill, you have a 20% chance to launch a frozen orb at a nearby enemy. And this enhancement effect is pretty strong as well. And even though it's a non-basic skill, meaning it's something you probably aren't going to be able to spam, when looking at endgame builds, there are probably going to be builds that pretty much allow you to infinitely spam abilities or come pretty close to that. So having this would just allow you to be launching frozen orbs like crazy. And also, this should correctly proc off of using frozen orb. So if you have this as an enhancement effect as well, you could potentially just be using frozen orbs and getting a bunch of additional frozen orbs. An upgrade for this would be Enhanced Frozen Orb. While above 50 mana, Frozen Orb's explosive damage is increased by 30%. So this would be a good upgrade if you're a much higher mana build and can keep yourself above 50 mana. This is just going to give you a pretty big damage increase. Then next up, we have Fireball with a mana cost of 50, lucky hit chance of 33%. Hurl an exploding ball of fire, dealing damage to surrounding enemies, so it's going to have an AoE effect on it. Its enhancement effect is when you kill an enemy, they explode in a fireball for 50% of its damage. So you shoot a fireball, does a small radius of AoE damage. If you kill something with the fireball, that thing also explodes for 50% of the damage it took. So you could potentially have this pretty big chain effect of exploding AoE damage just off of a base fireball. And an upgrade would be Enhanced Fireball. Fireball costs 10 less mana, so allows you to spam a lot more fireballs. And this is an example of an incredibly boring upgrade to Fireball, but still very strong. So I think there's going to be a pretty good mix of more interesting upgrades for skills and then pretty boring ones like this. And next up, we have Incinerate with a mana cost of 20 per second, a lucky chance of 40%. Channel a beam of fire, burning enemies for damage. Damage increases by 18% per second up to 71%. So you're just channeling this big beam of fire, and we actually have been able to see this in use from some of the developer updates, and they were essentially just showing off the animation. This one does look really cool. Then the enhancement effect is Lucky Hit. Direct damage has up to an 8% chance to spawn a rotating Incinerate beam. And whether this enhancement effect ends up being really strong or not, this is just a really cool enhancement effect. When you get any lucky hit, you can just spawn this rotating beam that's just a spinning Incinerate, and that's just really cool. An upgrade would be Enhance Incinerate. While channeling Incinerate, you take 30% less damage from close enemies. So this is just going to make you a lot more tanky when channeling this ability, which is going to also keep you in place unless there's some upgrade later on that allows you to move while doing it. Next up, we have Charge Bolts, a mana cost of 40, a lucky hit chance of 25%. Release 5 bolts of lightning that course along the ground in an erratic pattern, dealing damage each time they hit. The enhancement effect is whenever you are hit, there's a 40% chance to release 5 charged bolts. So the enhancement effect is essentially just casting this ability when hit 40% of the time when you get hit. An upgrade would be enhanced charge bolts. Charge bolts gain an extra projectile. And the upgrade effect should also affect the enhancements, because pretty much any upgrades, even just upgrades to the base skills, should also be upgrading the effect you get from the enhancements, which could potentially make some enhancements much stronger. And next up we have Chain Lightning, a mana cost of 35 and a lucky hit chance of 25%. Unleash a stream of lightning that deals 42% damage in chains between nearby enemies up to 4 times. And this says prioritizing enemies, but I think that's supposed to be prioritizing players, but I'm not 100% certain on that. Then the enhancement effect is Chain Lightning forms automatically after spending 100 mana. So every 100 mana you spend, you cast off a Chain Lightning. And this could also be very strong later down the road if you have a build fully focused on having a lot of mana and regenerating mana very quickly, then spamming out high mana cost abilities. You could have this as an enchantment effect with that build and just be spamming out Chain Lightning as additional effects. And then an upgrade would be Enhanced Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning bounces to 1 additional enemy. And finally, we have Ice Shards, 30 mana cost with a 25% lucky hit chance. Launch 5 shards that deal damage each. Deal 25% increased damage to frozen enemies. And you're primarily going to be freezing enemies by building up chill effects on them. And when you build it up enough, it freezes them. The enhancement effect is Ice Shards automatically conjure and fly towards frozen enemies. Now, I'm not 100% sure on how this is exactly going to work. It's sounding like anytime you freeze an enemy, it just casts an Ice Shard skill and sends all 5 at that frozen enemy, which if you have a big AoE cold focus build, you could potentially just be AoE spamming out Ice Shards. And an upgrade would be Enhanced Ice Shards. Ice Shards have a 50% chance to ricochet to another enemy. That would also affect the enhancement. So if you had this big AoE cold focus build where you're spam stunning and freezing enemies in a big AoE radius, now every time you freeze something, it throws Ice Shards. Then you get the upgrade. Now Ice Shards can ricochet. There could just be dozens of Ice Shards flying around the screen, ricocheting everywhere. And next up, we have defensive skills, starting off with Flame Shield. Has a cooldown of 20 seconds, a lucky hit chance of 50%. You engulf yourself in flames for 2 seconds, burning surrounding enemies for damage per second. And while Flame Shield is active, you are immune. So you can't take any damage while Flame Shield is active. And I'm pretty sure no other effects can affect you as well. Then the enhancement is Flame Shield automatically activates when you take fatal damage. It takes 120 seconds to recharge. And I've said this before, but this enhancement effect is probably going to be used by every hardcore sorceress. This is pretty much just a cheat death on a 2-minute cooldown. So instead of dying, you take fatal damage, it procs your immunity for 2 seconds, and you survive that fatal damage. That's incredibly strong for hardcore. And an upgrade would be Enhanced Flame Shield. Flame Shield grants 25% move speed while active. And I'm wondering if there's going to be some legendary effects or some other effects that allow Flame Shield to last even longer, because getting an immunity that lasts even longer would be pretty powerful. Next up, we have Teleport, 11-second cooldown, 40% lucky hit chance, transform into lightning, becoming unstoppable and surging to the target location, dealing damage around you upon arrival. The enhancement is Evade is replaced with Teleport on a 17-second cooldown. And I think this enhancement is actually really cool. If you don't know what Evade is, essentially in Diablo 4, no matter what class you're on, you have an Evade. So it's essentially just a base movement ability. Like if you're playing other action games and they just have a roll on like spacebar or something, that's essentially what Evade is. And this turns it into a Teleport, but your Evade now has a 17-second cooldown. And an upgrade would be Enhanced Teleport. After teleporting, take 30% less damage for 5 seconds. And this is very strong, lasts quite a while. And if I played any other Diablo game, there's probably going to be some build that allows you to just spam teleport around, which could potentially just give you 30% damage reduction at all times. Then next up, we have Ice Armor, 20-second cooldown. A barrier of ice forms around you for 6 seconds, absorbing 30% of your base life total in damage. While Ice Armor is active, 10% of your cold damage dealt is added to this barrier. The enhancement effect is upon getting hit, you have a 5% chance to apply Ice Armor. So essentially just a shield based off of your life that you can also keep increasing by dealing damage when it's active. An upgrade would be Enhanced Ice Armor. While Ice Armor is active, your mana regen is increased by 25%. So now this defensive is also adding to your offensive capabilities, giving you a lot more mana regen. Then finally, we have Frost Nova, 15-second cooldown, and it's also going to have additional charges. And you unleash a torrent of frost, freezing enemies around you for 2 seconds. And I'm not sure if this is actually going to be the frozen effect or if a freezing effect is going to be different. Because if this is just the actual frozen effect, this could be very strong with some of the other skills we've gone over. And the enhancement effect is Lucky Hit. Critical strikes have up to a 30% chance to make your active conjuration skills unleash a Frost Nova. And Conjuration Skills are just another category that we're also going to go over in this video. And an upgrade example would be Enhanced Frost Nova. Frost Nova's radius is increased by 25%. Again, that'll affect the enhancement effect. So you could have a critical strike build, use some conjuration effects, and just be spamming out those conjuration effects off of your critical strikes, which would also be spamming out Frost Novas. And next up, we have Conjuration Skills. First off, we have Ice Blades with a 12-second cooldown and a 71% lucky hit chance. Conjure Ice Blades for 6 seconds that rapidly slash enemies for damage and has a 20% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. And vulnerable just makes enemies take increased damage at a baseline, but there are a lot of effects in the game that will also do additional things to vulnerable targets. The enhancement effect is killing an enemy has a 10% chance to conjure Ice Blades. And I'm not sure if there's going to be a limit on how many Ice Blades you could have out, because if there's no limit or a very high limit, there's probably going to be some pretty good builds that are focused on clearing out big groups of enemies very quickly or speed running dungeons where this enhancement effect could be very strong. And an upgrade example is Enhanced Ice Blades. Ice Blades have a 10% increased chance to make enemies vulnerable. And next up, we have Hydra with a mana cost of 20 and a lucky hit chance of 62%. Summon a 3-headed Hydra for 8 seconds. Each head spits fire at a nearby enemy, dealing damage. And the enhancement effect is when a burning enemy is killed, a Hydra head spawns from its corpse for 3 seconds. So this enhancement effect is going to be incredibly strong with other fire skills that cause burn. Because if you're using a fire-based build, most likely everything you're going to kill is going to be burning when you kill it. So now everything you're going to kill is going to spawn a Hydra for 3 seconds. Could be incredibly strong. And an upgrade would be Enhanced Hydra. Hydra lasts for an additional 4 seconds. Now with the information I have, this should add 4 seconds to the Hydras spawned from the corpses of enemies. So unless there's some other calculation for this enhancement effect, or this enhancement effect is locked to only 3 seconds, this would make the Hydras spawned from those enemies be almost the normal duration of Hydra, which would just make this even more ridiculous. And finally, we have a Lightning Spear, a cooldown of 20 seconds, and a lucky hit chance of 35%. Conjure a spear of lightning that seeks out enemies for 6 seconds, dealing damage every time it hits. And the enhancement effect is absorbing crackling energy, has a 10% chance to conjure a lightning spear. And as we went over before, crackling energy is just going to give you mana when you walk over it, and there's going to be multiple ways you can conjure those crackling energies. And next up, we have a Mastery Skills, starting with Blizzard, that has a mana cost of 40, a lucky hit chance of 33%. Summon a Frigid Blizzard that deals massive damage and continuously chills enemies for a percentage over 8 seconds. And again, chilling is just slowing, and if you build up a chill enough, it's going to freeze the target. The enhancement effect is every 15 seconds, a blizzard forms over you and follows you for 4 seconds. So the enhancement effect is kind of basic, just a kind of uncontrollable passive, but still very strong. An upgrade would be Enhanced Blizzard. Blizzard duration is increased by 2 seconds, and again, this increased duration should affect the enhancement. Next up, we have Meteor, a mana cost of 40, lucky hit chance of 40%. You summon a meteor that strikes a target location, dealing damage and burning the ground for more damage over 3 seconds. The enhancement effect is every time an enemy takes burning damage, there is a 3% chance for a meteor to fall on them. And as we go on through these skills, it's seeming like there's going to be a fire burn build that is incredibly strong. And again, if I know Diablo, there is going to be a build completely focused on meteors and just spamming out crazy amounts of meteors. An upgrade would be Enhanced Meteor. If Meteor hits 3 or more enemies, there's a 30% chance for an additional meteor to fall on the same location. So again, just spamming out meteors with your meteor focused build. And next up, we have Firewall, a mana cost of 30, lucky hit chance of 40%, creates a wall of flames that burns enemies for massive damage over 8 seconds. The enhancement effect is Lucky Hit. Direct damage has up to a 15% chance to spawn a firewall for 3 seconds. And then an upgrade would be Enhanced Firewall. Enemies that stand in Firewall for at least 2 seconds take 25% increased burning damage from all sources. And Firewall itself is doing massive burn damage, so it's seeming like if you're doing a fire burn damage, the Firewall is probably going to be something you're going to want to be using quite a lot, because it also doesn't have a cooldown, so you could be spamming these things everywhere. And then finally, we have Ball Lightning, a mana cost of 50 with a lucky hit chance of 20%. Conjure a ball of lightning that slowly moves forward, continually zapping enemies for damage. The enhancement effect is when crackling energy would form, there's a 10% chance Ball Lightning is formed instead. So now we're seeing a little bit of a crackling energy build being built here. And an upgrade would be Enhanced Ball Lightning. Ball Lightning deals damage 30% more frequently. And this is actually a little bit different than dealing just 30% increased damage, because it deals damage more quickly, meaning additional effects that this could be proccing are going to be proccing a lot more, potentially making this a lot more than what a 30% damage increase would be giving you. And finally, we have ultimate skills. Now keep in mind, you can only use one ultimate at a time. And these ultimates are going to have long cooldown, they're going to be incredibly strong, but in Diablo 4, it's seeming like cooldown is much harder to get than say something like Diablo 3. So these are actually going to have long cooldowns most of the time. So first off, we have Deep Freeze, a cooldown of 60 seconds, and a lucky hit chance of 45%. Encase yourself in ice, becoming immune for 4 seconds, continually chilling enemies for 20%. When Deep Freeze ends, frozen enemies shatter for 200%. Casting Deep Freeze again ends the effect early. So essentially, you encase yourself in ice, becoming completely immune to everything, and you continually chill enemies, which is going to build up and freeze them, and then when Deep Freeze ends, all frozen targets take massive damage. An example of an upgrade is Prime Deep Freeze. Gain 5% of your base life as a barrier for 6 seconds for each enemy shattered by Deep Freeze. So now, if you do this in a big group of enemies, you're going to be getting a pretty big shield when it ends. Next up, we have Inferno with the 45-second cooldown and a 38% lucky hit chance. Ignite a roaring inferno that pulses in and out of a target area, burning enemies for massive damage over 8 seconds, and then explodes, dealing more damage to enemies on the outer edge. So just a big pulsing area of fire damage. An upgrade would be Prime Inferno. Enemies inside the Inferno's final explosion are immobilized for 4 seconds. And immobilized should just essentially be a root, so they can't move, but they're not stunned. Then finally, we have Unstable Currents with a 70-second cooldown. Lightning surges within you for 10 seconds. Whenever you cast a lightning skill, another random, non-basic lightning skill is also cast. And even though this one is going to be somewhat RNG, this is still just going to be a pretty fun skill to use, because you're just going to be spamming out tons of random lightning skills everywhere when using this. And an upgrade is Prime Unstable Currents. Unstable Currents increases attack speed by 25% while active. And this should essentially just allow you to cast a lot more skills, which is also going to cause a lot more skills to be cast, just making you a turret of random lightning skills. But that's all of the skills we have information on for the Sorceress in Diablo 4. And like I mentioned, there's a lot more upgrades in the Sorceress skill tree, and there are a bunch of other upgrades in the skill tree that aren't tied to these specific skills, but can still affect them. And I think I'm probably going to do more videos just going over the entirety of the skill trees for all of the different classes, so you guys can get all of that specific information. But I just wanted to go over all of the skills to give you guys a good idea of all of the different options you're going to have on release of the game. But also keep in mind there could potentially be more skills added in on release of Diablo 4, and then there'll probably be more added in future seasons and future expansions. But like I went over a few times while going through these skills, I'm definitely seeing some easy builds form in just some of the base skills themselves and some of the enhancement effects that the Sorceress has to use. But that's pretty much all I want to go over. So subscribe if you want to see more Diablo 4 or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about all the Sorceress skills, and thanks for watching.